Geht das schon los? Okay. Ladies, there are my slides, probably the opening slide. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your interest for not really the next panel, but it's just, let's say, short, brief notice on DAC 6, some ideas on recent developments, especially for the European general partners. My name is R.Welzel. I'm a partner with WTS in Frankfurt. May I introduce the WTS? WTS is a tax consultancy in Germany. We have approximately the 5th or 6th biggest tax consultancy in Germany with a revenue base of more than 170 million. And we are acting within the global network of WTS Global. For example, in France, our partner is FIDA. So much for the introduction of myself. The topic of today, DAC 6. I would put it this way. Susan Sturm, or the German the German Association of Tax Advisors has announced in the last few days that Miss Susan Sturm will be rewarded the yearly prize for the best PhD dissertation, and her topic has been essays on tax complexity. And DAC 6 is exactly about tax complexity. With DAC 6, the tax authorities are more or less applying process mining feature to tackle the, I would say, the fiscal bottlenecks of tax arbitrage in a cross-border context, to via this, let's say, process tax mining, to get in the position really to enhance the free flow of tax revenues. And this is exactly, I think, the critical feature the fund industry and the general partners will feature on a longer term, and which might be revisited to employ, let's say, risk analysis and more specific risk monitoring. This will be some of the ideas and some of the topics I intend to exchange within the next 20-25 minutes. I cannot see the first slide of the agenda, please. Yes. So what is on the agenda, what we intend to discuss today? It is not only that everyone has experienced within the last year, the implementation of DAC 6 was quite a struggling process, and more or less within the last days of the December 20, due to Brexit, completely, let's say, no one really expected that the UK will not follow any longer the DAC 6 regime, and what will be the specific implication for cross-border setup funds, taking into account that UK managers very often are the, let's say, responsible investment managers in a lot of situations. To highlight this a little bit more, we will have two very brief case studies for private equity funds. First, UK domiciled private equity funds, and the second slide or second case study of non-EU private equity funds, to give a little bit more flesh on this topic. Also, we will discuss some risk and business considerations. There might be some repercussions, especially for investors. And also there are on the horizon already new tax developments. Germany is discussing with let's say, even if they are quite late, to implement now the anti-tax avoidance directive, which will have some implications for DAC 6 reporting too. And then we will I will address some, let's say, multilateral instrument considerations, development in international tax law, which might be of interest for the fund managers too. As already indicated, DAC 6 is more or less a process tool employed by the tax authorities to get much more insight into the tax silos of cross-border tax arbitrage opportunities. This has been, let's say, in the past DAC 6 or the historically past DAC 6 has been implemented to more or less to provide the tax authorities with the opportunity to address aggressive tax planning. But the problem with the DAC 6 directive and also with the law system as such, that very often the law systems are quite, let's say, movable systems. The interpretations or the wording of the DAC 6 directive is very broad, so more or less on a wordly basis, it will capture a lot of, let's say, tax planning, tax structures, which are not per se tax aggressive. And DAC 6, the ideas of DAC 6 very much resonates the ideas of the UK, which have been, let's say, which have employed a lot of thought leadership in the past with DOTAs, etc., and which and the UK already had a very established and concise interpretation of a lot of these issues. And let's say with the political ramifications of Brexit, and then ultimately that the UK will in its entirety not employ DAC 6 any longer, the legal certainty of many interpretations, especially from a UK perspective, is let's say, is not applicable any longer, and this increases substantially, let's say, the interpretation risks of the wording of the directive as such. In many jurisdictions, the interpretation, the application are different, and we see a shifting, especially also in Germany, from addressing only aggressive tax planning towards, let's say, more tax planning, even legal accepted tax planning as such. And this already drives a little bit, let's say, not my concern, but the reason why probably also from on a general partner level, these tax structures, the tax interpretations might be revisited. The tax authorities are really consolidating a lot of information throughout Europe. It is quite unclear what will be the outcome of the consolidation of these ideas, definitely due to the, let's say, employed tax process mining, as I would put it. They will get many ideas how to enhance, let's say, the flow of tax revenues in the future. And that is, I think, a very specific topic for the private equity industry. If you, to be frank, tax planning was always quite a very important aspect within the private equity industry. And if you, via, for example, debt push-down policies, etc., it was very often possible to reduce the standard tax rates, let's say, of approximately 30% towards via high leverage, etc., to a significant lower after-tax rate for these investments, very often also in comparison to structures not being established as private equity structures, or just being established on a, let's say, on a local per jurisdiction setup. And these after-tax potential reduced after-tax rates, of course, they drive structural potential valuations. In the current scenario of high leveraged financing, high leverage plus the multipliers applied, and increased tax rates will have or might have on a midterm or longer term significant impact on valuations, at least to keep this in mind, due to the fact that the tax authorities are now in the position really to collect all efforts, all the tax structures, to analyze them with a much more professional impetus, so that, let's say, random tax audits will be significantly professional enhanced in the future, and the tax risks within these structures will therefore increase. I do not have to stress it. So DACs will have significant implications, or has already significantly implications for funds. In the last year, it was more or less a compliance issue, how to, let's say, run and exercise the tax process mining topic, and to come up with a prudent compliance reporting feature. In the longer term, it is how to address, how to formulate the inherent tax risks which might establish thereof in the future. Therefore, let's say we will now, I want now to come to the case studies. May I ask for the next slide, for the second next slide, the third slide, please. Next slide, please. And the next slide too. Next slide, please. Yes. So we have here the case study. Let's say, what was the good advantage, especially for UK managers, if they set up European private equity fund structures. The UK manager in the past could act as the I would say lead intermediary, so relying on the interpretation of the UK law, and the UK law, as already a little bit expressed, was very well established, and it also from a business rationale, it was, let's say, not interfering with the, let's say, business objectives of the managers as such. So it was possible for the lead intermediary, the UK manager, to apply DAC 6, and all the overall structure, the reporting in the various jurisdictions, both where the target companies are domiciled, and also for the jurisdictions of the investors, would more or less would have had the opportunity to rely fully on the legal interpretation of UK law, determined by the UK manager. Within the EU or typical EU private equity fund structures, very often set up either with their feeder structures in Luxembourg or in Ireland. Now the reporting will switch to, or the main responsibility will switch to the alternative investment fund manager here on this slide in Luxembourg. So there, in the case of, let's say, EU private equity fund structures, it is still possible that that the investment alternative investment fund manager domiciled here in Luxembourg will determine the narrative for the DAC 6 reporting for the whole group, and via reporting from Luxembourg to the various jurisdictions, the interpretation and the application of Luxembourg law will be then determine the more or less the overall DAC 6 narrative of the let's say fund structure, and probably of the UK manager too. So the UK manager will be in a position to more or less drive this the narrative of the DAC 6 reporting in the future too. If we switch to the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Yes, now we have the situation where, which is a little bit more complicated, and therefore I want to describe very briefly the setup of the structure so that we are all on the same page. We have typical master feeder Cayman structure, manager domiciled in the UK. We have target companies in the EU, and we have EU domiciled investors. In such a scenario, there is no, let's say, legal entity existing in the EU, no manager, no legal entity, which could, let's say, or which will be per se the lead intermediary for the structure. The UK managers, they cannot report under EU law. They are not forced or not, if they have no presence in specific presence in the EU countries, they are not obliged to report. Nevertheless, on the investment level that here described as the target companies, it is very likely that there will be arrangements and that there will be intermediaries who will have to report on specific tax features of the employed structures. Financing and so on might be the issues. These intermediaries, they cannot, let's say, more or less pass their obligation to the manager or to an entity controlled by the manager in the EU. And on the investor level, the let's say the taxpayers are very often the relevant, or will be regarded as, for example, will be regarded as the relevant taxpayers, and or they are the relevant taxpayers in the interpretation of the directive, and thereof, if there is no, let's say, consistent reporting from the from any intermediaries, taking into account the position of these ultimate taxpayers, they will be in the situation to report by themselves. How could this happen? It is very likely that the intermediaries which will report on the investment level are not aware of the, let's say, ultimate taxpayers. And the ultimate taxpayers, of course, they have to conduct somehow the main benefit test, whether they really employ DAC 6 reportable structures, yes or no. But it might be quite likely that they are aware of, let's say, some of the tax optimization which will take place in these structures, and therefore will have to report by themselves. As a reaction, we very often see that these taxpayers, especially from a German perspective, will try to negotiate via side letters that the obligation of reporting will be shifted, or will be shifted back to the manager again, so that the manager will report any DAC 6 features on behalf of their investors. Very often, especially in a German context, these the managers also agree, especially if the feeder structure, master feeder structures are partnerships, to conduct the yearly tax filing. And with the yearly tax filing, if these are conducted by the managers in Germany, and this is a very specific German topic, the German tax return for the let's say intermediary or for the investment entities also have to report on their let's say DAC 6 structures. And so if the managers more or less by contract fulfill the or will conduct the tax declarations for the investors, they incur a very specific reporting let's say obligation, and with this reporting obligation in the longer term, they will be fully exposed to any let's say tax audits conducted by German tax authorities. The managers, being fully aware of all the structures, will be faced with tax audits in the future. I think that is quite likely, and therefore, let's say this is a sort of an additional risk to keep in mind and to address. I think that is quite important. Now, for the last minutes, what are the future developments? There are not only bad, from a manager perspective, bad developments, but also quite positive developments. First of all, due to the, let's say, current implementation of or the current discussion on the level of the OECD report, of the G20 base report, and project shifting, tax challenges from digitization. There, in the so-called Pillar 2 report, investment funds, which in the past had been quite often negatively stamped by the tax authorities due to the fact that they are set up as tax, let's say, neutral flow-through vehicles, and therefore the sentiment of the tax authorities had always been, or very often, a little bit negative. Now really see see within the reports, in the OECD report, that these flow-through investment funds, especially if they are regulated entities, and many of the fund structures will be regulated entities, that they are conceptually accepted from the OECD from a tax planning perspective, and therefore the negative sentiment will be somehow reversed. Last but not least, the anti-avoidance tax directive, which will be now implemented or is already implemented in various jurisdictions. I think this is very much of interest also for the private equity fund industry and also for other fund structures. Why? Because if on the target investment level of the target funds, so the investments in corporations, etc., there are more stringent and more well-defined tax, let's say, rules are applied. This reduces significantly the tax. That's of course economically not the best side, but from a general compliance perspective, reduces the tax arbitrage opportunities, and thereof will or should minimize or should diminish the DAC 6 reporting in the near future too. Last but not least, one additional remark, what we see in respect of DAC 6 reporting, a lot of, let's say, really a very significant number of tax structures have been reported. So the figures in Germany are exceeding, I think, 4,000 is much more than 4,000 structures have been, let's say, reported to the tax authorities. And with the new international tax developments, it is via the so-called multilateral instrument, if it is signed by the respective jurisdictions, it will be quite easy to address changes in the international double taxation treaties for the various countries, and therefore reduce the, let's say, any tax planning optimizations in the future too. We are not talking about here just aggressive tax planning, but also tax planning which are not in the interest probably of some of the tax authorities, will be significantly or might be significantly revisited within the future, let's say, double taxation treaties. And therefore the legal framework will change, and this might in the midterm really have significant impact on the after-tax return for some of the investment structures employed, and do not have to address if the structures, if the after-tax return is reduced significantly. This will have valuation implications too. Thank you very much for your interest. If there are any questions, I would more than happy. Otherwise, thank you very much for your interest, and you're well deserved, and wish you the best for your well deserved lunch.